Good morning and welcome to week 10. I am super bummed that we have to do this particular lecture online because I know we have been talking so much about social media in class, in person in our lecture discussions, that I am bummed that we cannot finish that in person. So we are where we are, and we would rather be safe than have someone come down with COVID. So here we are. Welcome to Module 10. I have recorded a separate video for you that's talking about the remaining weeks in the semester and how we're going to handle that. So make sure you check that out before you get too far into this week's material. So this week we are talking about the self and your roles as a student, as a friend, as a consumer of social media, as a parent, a sibling, whatever you may do. We've been building to this point by talking about how we view our bodies based on the messages that we get from society. But we're kind of not backing up so much as taking a broader perspective, because body image, body esteem is only one component of who we are. And sometimes it can feel like it is a very big component, or it's a large contributor to our sense of self. But I want to kind of put some perspective, I guess, into that conversation today and talk about all of the different many ways that you are you, and how that all starts. And so we're definitely going to talk about body esteem, body image today. That's been what we've been talking about for the past couple of weeks. We'll talk about all the media influences, including social media today. But I want to really take a step back and have you ask the question of yourself, who am I? From a broader perspective of just what I look like. So we've talked a lot about rewinding the clock and remembering when you were a child, and we're going to do that again today. So the self-concept, or that essential who am I question, is something that we see infants struggling with. And as we grow through toddlerhood, through childhood, through pre-adolescence, adolescence, and then now into adulthood, you get to decide more and more, not just who you are, but who you want to be. So I want to break that down, and there's many, many different ways to do this. And this is actually a class in and of itself. This semester, the other in-person class I've been teaching is a class on the self, and we're spending an entire semester talking about this. So again, I'm trying to cram all of that material into about 30 minutes. So we'll see how it goes. So self-concept, who am I? When we think from a developmental trajectory, a developmental perspective, this actually is what we develop first. You have to know who you are to then be able to know and predict and explain your own behavior, so self-knowledge, self-awareness, and to then have feelings about yourself, self-esteem. And some of that comes from the roles that you play and have played. So think for a moment back to your childhood. What was your role in your family, in your school? Were you the funny kid? Were you the athlete? Were you the friend that everyone came to? Were you the person that people leaned on? Were you the mediator of family disagreements? So think about all of the different roles that you had as a child, and then think about how those have evolved. So yes, you're a student. Clearly that is one of your roles. Many of you also are employees. Many of you are your children. Many of you still have parents that are living, and so that's part of your life. Many of you are siblings. Many of you are parents, actually. And so some of you are in sororities or fraternities, or you're members of different social groups, churches, all of these different things that we do that can also comprise who we are. So we've talked so much about the body and about what we eat and how we look and how we feel about that. But really, the self is comprised of so much more than your body esteem, your feelings about your body concept. So for all of those different things, and we'll get into those a little bit today, And for this week's discussion board, I'm going to have you explore your role as a student. So know that you are more than, whatever you're going through, you are more than um, this person who is struggling with trying to figure out how to go to an online format for all of your classes. You're still a sister or a brother or a father or a daughter or uh, a student or a best friend or a partner, whoever you may be. So we all have a lot going for us in our incredibly busy lives these days. So I want to again go back in time. So we've talked a lot about the critical age period of 3 to 5. So last week and the week before, we were focusing on that as that being when children learn what fat is and what thin is, and that fat is bad and thin is good. And they learn that in that age frame because that's when we're learning everything about who we are. That's when we start to learn the labels, unfortunately, that we put on people. That's when we begin to realize and verbalize in ways that just were not available to us in our more pre-verbal stages. We now have a grasp of language that's sufficient in ages 3 to 5, and we're learning more and more every day that we get to decide who we are. So to get you to this point, so babies somewhere around 1 year of age begin to show that they understand who they are as a different person than mom, than dad, than brother, than sister, than grandma, grandpa, neighbor, whoever it may be. So to test this, they actually do something called the Rouge test. And so if you have a small child in your surroundings, you can try this. Maybe not, I don't know, maybe not the best idea. So what they do is they put a dab of, it was used to be called Rouge in the 70s when the test was developed. Blush essentially is what it is, lipstick, whatever, something that's very bright in color on the child's nose. And you would just brush it on with the end of your finger, like, playing like you're touching I'm touching your nose. And then you put a dot on their nose. And then you stick them in front of the mirror. And the question is, what do they do? So up until about age 1, so 12 months of age, children will point and they will laugh and they think it is hysterical that the baby in the mirror has a dot on their nose. They don't get that it's them. But somewhere between 12 and 18 months of age, they immediately go to wipe that spot off of their nose because they know it's their nose. They understand that they're looking at them. Is this perfect? No, it's not a perfect test, but most children around 1 year of age are still very much pre-verbal, or if they are verbal, they just have such a basic vocabulary that they couldn't tell you who they were. They couldn't tell you if they had a concept of the sense of self. And so that's the best test we have for when the sense of self develops. And then as they begin to be more verbal and have words and learn all of these concepts that are coming at them so rapidly, ages 3 to 5 is a really crucial period in their development where they then begin to have words to put to their sense of self. I, me, my, I like this is mine, this is yours. So they begin to understand and be able to verbalize that. So then as we grow up, we become generally more self-aware. And the more self-aware we are, the more aware we are of social norms, the more aware we are of the quote unquote rules in society, and we tend to follow them. We tend to follow those social norms. And so parents will say, be on your best behavior. And basically what they're saying is, and follow the social norms that we've put forward for you. And so the older we get, the more self-aware we are, the more we're able to follow those social norms set forth for us by parents, by society, by teachers, by whoever it may be. And the interesting thing is, generally, although we have many aspects to ourselves, what we put out there, and I'm talking face-to-face interactions, I'm not talking about online where you can make up your own identity, we'll get to that later. But generally face-to-face interactions, we see ourselves as others see us. And so if you feel like you're an introvert, other people who maybe don't know you super well, but know you a little bit would still be able to identify that person probably is an introvert. So we broadcast the things that we believe about ourselves. Society feeds that back to us. And then that deepens that belief. That can be good, that can be bad, right? We think about all of the stereotypes around STEM. So one of the reasons we have all of the STEM programs, especially for uh, low socioeconomic status for women, is because traditionally little boys were told they were good at math and science, and little girls were told they were good at English. And so they started growing up buying into that as it was getting more and more reinforced, and that became part of their self concept. And so, as a society, once we realized we were doing that to kids and we were labeling kids, and that was actually altering the course of what they wanted to do with their lives and limiting their potential, we decided we probably shouldn't do that anymore. And so now we have all of these course correction programs, like all the STEM initiatives out there. And I'm sure you could think of others out there that you are aware of. So, sense of self. So we start with our self concept. So the moment we are able to verbalize, so that 3 to 5 age range, the moment we are able to begin to understand who we are and use our words to describe ourselves. And again, when you're 3 to 5, you're literally using words like fat and skinny. You're not going to have some in-depth conversation about who you are. They're very much one-word labels. I am a kid. I am fat. I am good. I am nice. I am kind. Whatever the words are. I'm a student. I'm an athlete. And those may even be too complicated for a 3 to 5 year old. But the older we get, of course, the more words we learn, the more we're able to describe ourselves. So when we hit pre-adolescence to adolescence, we've developed enough, and even really probably, we talked last time about kind of the critical ages. 3 to 5 is when we learn fat is good, fat is bad, and thin is good in our society anyway. 6 to 8, girls start to display body image concerns. 8 to 10, boys start to display body image concerns. And part of why that's happening is now they have enough language to describe what's going on with them and more awareness that they don't meet the quote unquote ideal, right? And so what's happening is that their self concept is branching out. It's not just, I am this, you are that anymore, like it was when you were 3 to 5. Now we have a self image, like we have a body image, we have a self image. Body image is a component of that. So it's the way we see ourselves. We see ourselves as a student or an athlete or a mother or whatever is part of your role system. That's part of your self image. It's how you see yourself, how you describe yourself. That then gets a value tied to it, right? So with 3 to 5, you're already learning that fat is bad and thin is good. You've learned a lot of stuff about other attributes. So maybe being an athlete was something that was of high esteem in your family. And so your self-esteem might have been then tied to how good of an athlete you were, because that's what you learned was important to your family or your school or whatever it may be. And so the self-image, the way you see yourself, now has an affect, your feelings that are tied to that. And then, again, starts ages 3 to 5, we begin to understand when we measure up and when we don't. So our ideal self begins to form usually between 6 and 8. So we need to have enough verbiage. We need to have enough opportunity in years for society to tell us what's good and what's bad, or for family or for friends or whoever we're learning this from, for us to form an ideal self. Because at this point, you have to realize, usually again, 6 to 8 years old, you begin to realize that how I am right now and how I want to be are not the same thing. And clearly, this is something that develops more in depth and more so as you enter pre-adolescence, adolescence, adulthood, right? If you talk about an ideal self to a 3-year-old, they probably have no idea what you're talking about. But I can say those words to you and you know exactly what I'm talking about, the way you want to be. And there's usually a discrepancy between your current self-image and who you want to be, your ideal self. And that then affects the middle. It affects the self-esteem. It affects how you feel about yourself, which you feel like you're not measuring up. And again, you can have a self-concept, a self-esteem for many different roles in your life. And so maybe you have a really big discrepancy for your athletic self-esteem, because maybe you want to be a lot more athletic than you are, but you have a very small discrepancy for your ideal student self-esteem, because you feel like you are a good student and you are exactly where you want to be, right? So we talk about these concepts very broadly, but realize they can be narrowed down to each individual aspect of the self, and there are many. So where does this come from? So again, we start really understanding this between 12 and 18 months of age. We're able to start to verbalize it from 3 to 5. But basically, our sense of self comes quite a bit from who we surround ourselves. So as a child, you probably didn't have a lot of choice, right? You went to school, you had your family, whoever that may have been for you at home, um, and that was how you learned about yourself. The other component I want to draw into this is that our culture that we're raised in also influences our sense of self. So some cultures, like the United States, are very independent. We are our own person. We have our own goals. We have our own self-esteem. It's all about me and what I can do. And so that's called an independent view of the self. In some countries and in some cultures, subcultures within the US, the self tends to be more interdependent. There's a lot more reliance on an overlap between yourself and your family and society. And so, quick side story: when I was in college, myself, one of my best friends was Korean, and he had come to the United States when he was 6 with his mom, his dad, grandma, grandpa, some cousins, aunts, uncles. So they all came over to the US. He was 6. So he grew up in an independent culture. But his family, the country of Korea, is a very interdependent kind of culture. And so um, everything was left to the head of the household, which was grandfather, the oldest person. All decisions were made by that person for the whole family. And you accepted it because that was just part of your sense of self. That was who you were. It was who grandfather told you were going to be. So my friend, his American name was Michael because no one could pronounce his Korean name. And so he gave up and he just called himself Mike. But so going through this American school system, basically his entire schooling, because he was 6 when he got to the US, very, very different. So he became a lot more independent. He became more rebellious. His family was completely appalled because in Korea, you don't do that. You do what grandma, grandpa, mom, dad, aunts, uncle, your elders tell you to do without question. That's who you are. That's a part of your sense of self, is that interdependence. And so coming into the US, his parents started a laundromat, a laundry business, and he was expected to take it over. And so they sent him to college to major in economics with the understanding that he would take over the family business after he got his bachelor's in economics. Well, he didn't want to do that. They also had a bride picked out for him back in Korea whom he never met, but an arranged marriage from when they were both actually still in utero. And so he didn't want to marry her. He didn't know her. He never met her. And so there were a lot of rebellion. His family was appalled. At this point, his grandfather had died, so now grandma was in charge. But you can just kind of, I like that example because it so demonstrates the clash between the independent and the interdependent view. So the compromise they came up with by the time we graduated undergrad was he got to pick his bride, but she had to be a first generation Korean that grandma approved of. And he still had to take over the family business. But he could change his major and not major in economics, but he still had to know how to take over the family business. So we lost touch of each other after we both left undergrad, and so I'm not quite sure whatever happened with him. But just to kind of give you an example, so culture. So within the United States, some cultures are a lot more interdependent. Well, the Latinx culture, right? So Latino, Latina students tend to, not always, but tend to have a more interdependent view of self. Still very independent, especially if they were raised in the United States. But Mexico tends to be a very collectivistic country in terms of valuing family and valuing your role in the family, and just doing what your elders tell you to do. And so pockets of cultures within the United States especially if your family is not first generation. You may have a different view of self, and that's beautiful. That's wonderful. Right? It just may be a little different than some individuals who have generations have been in the U.S. and are very, very independent. So that culture also contributes to yourself. Just kind of give you an idea, the independent versus the interdependent self. Um, Interdependent, very focused on the good of the family, the good of the whole, the good of the culture. And so, like Michael's family, they view Americans as incredibly egotistical and narcissistic because we're all about me. We're very independent. And we view them as being not standing up for themselves, right? So conforming. And that's not something we tend to value in the United States. So just kind of, because nobody's right, nobody's wrong. It's just how it is, right? It's just how it is. And so if you grew up in multiple cultures or are a student who is a first generation college student, you may identify with some of that conflict that I was just talking about. So all of that, all the stuff then feeds into your self-esteem. Calvin and Hobbes, I got to throw this one in there. When we feel like things are not going our way, whether it's academically, whether it's body image, whether it's as an athlete, as a mom, whatever your role may be, oftentimes our self-esteem takes a hit. And we have to figure out then how we're going to rally around that. So what is self-esteem? It's the way that you see and think about yourself. It's a measure of how much you value, respect, and feel confident about yourself. And we've been talking about this in terms of body esteem in the past few weeks, but really you can broaden that out because body esteem is a component of self-esteem, academic self-esteem, athletic self-esteem. We have so many different components to our self-esteem. And in some places we may feel very good about ourselves, and in some places we may not. But I love this little meme because it's true. What matters most at the end of the day is actually how you see yourself. So it's comprised, again, of your self-concept, of all these different experiences you've had, relationships, your culture, what's happening today, what's happened throughout your lifehood. It kind of builds upon itself. So everyone you've met so far has had a small or big role in how you view yourself. And so this is where you really, I love that this is this photo where they're all looking at their phones. So think about who you have in your life, and that may be in an online capacity, it may be in an in-person capacity, and where they fit. How much of a role do they play? Do their opinions matter? I guess is really what I'm getting at. How much do their opinions matter? And if it's someone you don't know, that is a celebrity you follow online, you really, really want to think about that question. How much of your power are you giving to someone who you don't even know? You get to choose. That's the beauty of the self. Ultimately, you get to choose. So as I just said, we have multiple self-esteems. Again, I teach an entire semester about this. So much we can talk about. I'm having you identify in your discussion board this week your academic self-esteem, your role as a student, how you feel about that. But you have so many different social self-esteem. So with your friends, your family, if you work, that's probably going to contribute to your self-esteem. If you volunteer, right? A physical self-esteem, so your ability to do what you want to do. Technological, right? So that may be part of your self-esteem. Artistic, if you're an artist, that may be part of your self-esteem. So self-esteem is composed of all of the different facets of us. And we get to decide at the end of the day how much weight we want to give to each of those facets. So we've been talking so much about body esteem, but I want you to realize that that's only a component. And you get to decide how much of your sense of self and your self-esteem is going to be tied to your body and how you feel about your body versus all these other components, or just what you think about yourself in general. There's a global self-esteem, right? You may be like, I'm good. I'm really good. I don't care what other people think about me. I am good. That is a mark of high self-esteem. And that is also an indicator generally of pretty good health and happiness. So things to think about. So how is self-esteem affected by those that we surround ourselves with? So we know that self-esteem is built, our self-concept this self-awareness, all of this is built on our interactions with people throughout our lives because we have to be around others to learn who we are and how we're different from them. And we do this by comparison. So this is a natural part of life. It's how we learn. We compare what we're doing to what somebody else is doing. So again, rewind the clock back to when you're a baby. Babies learn so rapidly because we have these neurons in our brains called mirror neurons. They're mimicry neurons. So it's how we think. Babies learn how to speak and to walk and to just do things so quickly, is because their mirror neurons allow them to unconsciously compare what they're doing to what somebody else is doing and mimic that, which is great because that's how we learn. But as we grow up, we still have mirror neurons, and maybe we don't. Maybe we're learning a lot. Yes, you're still a student, you're still learning a lot, but you're not learning as much or as rapidly as you were when you were 2, because you already mastered a lot of the basic skills of being a human. And so you're learning things that you want to learn now. But you're not, everything isn't new, right? There's a lot of stuff you already know. So you have all these excess mirror neurons and they need something to do. Well, they're still doing their job. They're still comparing. That's what they do. It's social comparison theory. So social comparison theory takes that mirror neuron and kind of posits it one step forward, arguing that our self-esteem actually is affected by who we compare ourselves to. So not just in a learning capacity anymore, because now we're adults, but in terms of our belongingness, our feelings like we matter, our self-evaluation of how good or how bad we are, all these different aspects of self, our decision-making abilities, what's inspirational and motivational to us, regulating our emotions and our well-being. So all of that can be tied directly back to the mirror neurons, directly back to who we're comparing ourselves to. And we get to choose, right? We get to choose that. And what the basis of the comparison actually is. So all of these things can tie into our feelings about ourselves. So social comparison comes in a variety of different forms, and I'm greatly simplifying the matter. But in the literature, we talk about 2 basic kinds of social comparison: upward and downward. And so when we're kids, we're doing a lot of upward social comparison because we want to learn that skill. We want to be like that person. We want to learn that word. We want to learn how to bike. We want to learn how to rollerblade. We want to learn how to do these things. And so we're looking for role models who can inspire and teach us how to do what it is that we want to do. So that's called upward social comparison. And when we're children, it's a really great tool for us to have because it's inspiring and it's motivational. But as we get older and we have more capacity to think about ourselves, sometimes this can turn into a bad thing if we choose, instead of to use that role model as an inspiration, to feel bad about ourselves because we're not that. So it can be tied to low self-esteem because we feel bad that, why don't I look like that, right? So going back to the discussions we've been having in class about Instagram celebrities and people that we compare ourselves to that have been photoshopped and had Botox and all this work done, right? We feel inadequate because we don't look like that. But you can make a choice, right? You can choose to not follow that person. You can choose not to make that comparison. You can choose to look for people who inspire you and motivate you rather than making you feel bad about yourself. Or do your homework, right? Really get the truth behind what you're comparing yourself or who you're comparing yourself to, and learn the reality. So we talked about that in class, right? A lot of times there's, especially on social media, there's filters. They've edited those photos. You don't know that. So what are you comparing yourself to? So again, just be very, very careful and learn more about your own habits and use that to make some decisions moving forward for how you want to act and what you want to do. Downward social comparison. So downward social comparison can be good and it can be bad. So just like upward social comparison. So downward social comparison can be in the form of, I am so grateful that I don't have COVID-19. I'm going to utilize this day to the fullest. I'm going to be kind to other people because I know they're stressed out. I'm going to make sure that my apartment is clean for my roommates so that they don't have to worry about germs or whatever, right? So downward social comparison can be used for good. You realize that you're more fortunate than other people. That's the key here. You realize that you're more fortunate than other people. And you can use that knowledge for good, or you can use that knowledge for ill. Bullying is also a form of downward social comparison. You put other people down to make you feel better about yourself. So again, it's not that one type of social comparison or social comparison in general is a bad thing. It's how we choose to use it. A choice. We have a choice. When we were 3, not so much. We didn't know any better. Now you do. And so you get to decide who you want to compare yourself to, how you're going to go through about that process. Do you want to find people that inspire you? Are you going to use that to put other people down, right? I mean, there's so many different ways to do this. So there's always 2 sides to the coin, right? There's the good and the bad and everything. So social media. So this is still a relatively, meaning about the past decade, new research area because there weren't that many sites out, right? I mean, there was some MySpace, and then there was Facebook, and then now we have all of these social networking sites out there. Of course, as we've talked about repeatedly in class, you don't see reality most of the time. You may not know that, but you don't. You see the highlight reel because people only tend to post images that represent them in ideal ways. And you see the edited, filtered pictures. Again, because people want to represent themselves in ideal ways. And so part of this social comparison game is just educate yourself and realize, just like we've talked about in class, now people know that magazine covers are Photoshop. We don't worry about magazine photo covers anymore, not nearly to the extent that we used to, because people know they're Photoshopped. People don't necessarily know the photo that you're seeing on Instagram has been edited. And you don't necessarily know that they took 200 photos to get that one photo that they then edited and filtered to look like that. Or some of the research, because I said this is my research area, some of the the articles that I've read, and we've talked about this before in class, the fitness gurus that have influencer accounts on Instagram, they get into shape, they take a ton of pictures of themselves over a 2-week period, and they see those pictures throughout the year, even though they're only in that shape for 2 weeks out of the whole year. You don't know that. So again, what are you comparing yourself to? Make sure that you know and you're using it for good and not to make you feel bad about yourself. That's the key. So a lot of studies on Facebook, because Facebook's been out longer, fewer studies on Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat. Those are just now starting to come out in the past couple of years because they just needed to be out long enough for us to study them. So I'm using Facebook, but know that all of the results that I'm talking about on Facebook have now been replicated with all of these other social media platforms, Instagram, Snapchat. The newer the platform, like TikTok, we don't know yet because people haven't done studies on TikTok, but they'll be coming out. So stay tuned. So Facebook users, Instagram users, Snapchat users. So now we can insert a lot of different social networking sites, pretty much all of them. Believe that other users are happier, more successful than they are. Social comparison, because you see the highlight reel of their life. You see only the good stuff that's been edited and filtered. So someone with an active social networking site, lots of comments, lots of likes, is usually perceived as an upward social comparison target, like an influencer on Instagram in terms of popularity, sociability, perceived social capital. Again, depending on how you use that, maybe that's someone who inspires you. Maybe it's someone that makes you feel bad about yourself because you feel like I'm not that and I should be. So again, just be very careful about how you're using your social networking sites. I'm not telling you to get off of them, but I'm just saying be careful how you're using them because it's really easy to get caught in the trap of an upward social comparison spiral or a downward social comparison spiral where you end up not feeling good about yourself. So you get to choose. So just choose wisely. 88% of people, this was a 2017 study on Facebook, 88% of people engage in making social comparisons on Facebook. 98% of those are upward social comparisons, and most of those are not the good kind. Most of those are the I feel bad about myself because I'm not that kind, not the, oh, you're so inspiring and inspirational and you motivate me kind, right? So again, similar studies now coming out on Instagram about that same thing. So just be careful. Strong relationship between social media and self-esteem. Increase in social media usage causes self-esteem of individuals to decrease. Again, it depends on what you're doing, right? Following body positivity sites is totally different than following a celebrity that you're comparing yourself to and feeling bad about yourself because you don't look like them, right? So just again, be wise with your usage. But the reality is, most of the people that we survey, including the research in my own lab, they're not doing the positive stuff. We're talking like, 1 in 200 people talk about body positivity and how they go on social media sites to get motivational quotes. The other 199 or more of the people that we survey are going on there to compare, and they end up feeling bad about themselves. You get to choose. You get to choose. So just choose wisely. That's all I'm saying.